There is a building older than memory. You have been walking toward it for some time now, across the quiet hours of the evening, through the small rituals of settling in, past the noise of the day and the weight of everything it asked of you, and now you are here. The entrance is low and wide, the stone worn smooth by centuries of hands and shoulders brushing past. The air inside is cool and still and carries a scent you recognize without being able to name. Dust and ancient paper and the faint mineral breath of stone that has been standing in the same place for a very long time. Your footsteps are soft on the floor. There is no echo, only a muffled warmth, as though the walls themselves have absorbed so many years of silence that sound simply dissolves into them. Tonight, on Official Sleepy Historian, we are guests in a world that has been waiting thousands of years for us to visit. This is a library, not the kind with shelves and filing systems and signs asking you to be quiet. This is a library written in earth and stone, in carved pillars and flood myths and thin dark lines buried in the soil of 4 continents. Every room holds a different kind of memory. Some memories are written in geological layers that took millions of years to form. Some are carved into massive stone pillars by people whose names we will never know. Some are stories told around fires, on every continent, in every language, all describing the same extraordinary event, a world that ended and a world that began again. The rooms grow quieter as you move deeper in. There is no need to visit them all. There is no need to visit any of them. If all you want tonight is to rest near the entrance and let the quiet settle around you. You do not need to read every page tonight. You do not need to remember anything, or follow any argument, or arrive at any conclusion. The library is patient. It has been waiting for 12,000 years. It can wait a little longer while you find a comfortable place to rest. There is a question resting on a table near the entrance, like a book left open by the last visitor. It is a simple question, though the answer has occupied scientists and dreamers and firelight storytellers for generations. For 300,000 years, human beings have walked this earth with the same brains, the same restless hands, the same capacity for wonder and invention that eventually put satellites into orbit and symphonies into concert halls. 300 millennia of modern minds, of people who could think and plan and imagine and build, who buried their dead with care and painted animals on cave walls by firelight and crossed open ocean on rafts of bound wood. 300,000 years. And yet, at roughly 10,000 years before the Common Era, suddenly, everywhere at once, cities appeared, agriculture, writing, monuments of staggering precision aligned to the stars. Not gradually, not in the faltering way you would expect from a species discovering these things for the first time, but confidently, already knowing, as if they were remembering rather than inventing. What happened in that gap? What changed? What could possibly account for 300,000 years of apparent silence and then a sudden explosion of capability that appeared simultaneously on every continent? Or, and this is the quieter question, the one that keeps the library's lights on long after dark. What was lost and how much of what came after was not invention, but remembrance? There is no urgency to answer tonight. The question will still be here in the morning. For now, it is enough to walk through the rooms, slowly, in no particular hurry, and see what the earth has been trying to tell us. The first room is the closest to the ground. It smells of earth and deep time. Imagine a cliff face. Not a dramatic cliff, not a mountain edge, just a quiet section of exposed earth, perhaps along a riverbank where the water has been cutting away at the land for centuries, revealing what lies beneath. You can see the layers: pale soil, then darker soil, then a reddish band of clay, then something lighter again. Each layer is a chapter in a story the earth has been writing since long before anyone was here to read it. The colors shift gradually from one layer to the next, the way seasons change, not suddenly, but in slow, patient increments that only become visible when you step back far enough to see the whole cliff at once. And then, running through it all, thinner than a fingernail, there is a dark line. In 2007, a team of 26 researchers from 9 different institutions published a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that described this line. They had found it on 4 continents: in North America, in Europe, in the Middle East, in Central Asia. It always appeared at exactly the same depth in the geological record. It always dated to exactly the same moment in time, 12,800 years ago. What they found inside the line made them stop. Nanodiamonds, microscopic diamonds that form only under one condition: extreme pressure, the kind of pressure that occurs when something strikes the earth at tens of thousands of miles per hour. These are not the diamonds you would find in a ring or a display case. They are invisible to the naked eye, scattered through the soil like dust, and they have no business being there at all unless something immense fell from the sky and struck the ground with a force beyond anything in recorded human experience. Platinum at concentrations 100 times higher than the surrounding soil, a metal vanishingly rare on our planet's surface, but common in comets and asteroids, arriving on Earth only when the sky delivers it. Tiny glass spherules formed when rock melts in an instant and solidifies again in the air. Perfectly round, impossibly smooth. The shape that molten stone takes when it is thrown upward by an impact and cools as it falls. And soot. Vast, continent-spanning quantities of soot, consistent with wildfires burning simultaneously across North America, Europe, and beyond, as if every forest on the continent had ignited in the same terrible moment. The Earth writes its own history in layers. Most of those layers take thousands of years to form, grain by grain, season by season, in a patience that belongs to stone and not to any living thing. But this line, this thin, dark sentence, was written in a single event. Something happened here, 12,800 years ago, that left a mark on every continent where anyone has thought to look for it. Imagine tracing it with your finger. The soil above is pale and ordinary. The soil below is pale and ordinary. And between them, this dark stripe, thinner than the edge of a coin, holding the memory of something the earth itself could not forget. The nanodiamonds alone tell you the scale of it. Diamonds do not form gently. They require the kind of force that belongs to objects falling from the sky at speeds the mind cannot comfortably hold. You do not need to understand the chemistry. You do not need to remember the names or the numbers. What matters is the image. A thin dark line, present on 4 continents, 12,800 years old, and inside it, the signature of something immense and sudden and world-changing. The Earth remembers what no one was left to write down. The patience of geological time is its own kind of quiet. Millions of years compressed into visible layers, each one laid down with a slowness that makes even centuries feel like passing thoughts. There is something restful in that. The knowledge that the earth is in no hurry, that it records everything and forgets nothing, and that it will hold its memories for as long as anyone cares to look. The layers above and below the dark line are calm, ordinary, undisturbed. They have all the time in the world. And so, tonight, do you. The next room is warmer. It smells of carved stone and old dust, and the ceiling is open to the sky. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt arrived at a hilltop in southeastern Turkey. He was looking at a site that previous surveys had dismissed. A rounded hill covered in broken limestone and dry grass, the kind of place you might walk past a dozen times without stopping. The locals called it Potbelly Hill, a gentle mound in a landscape of gentle mounds, unremarkable from any distance. But Schmidt noticed something the earlier visitors had missed. The broken stones scattered across the surface were not natural. They had been shaped by human hands. And there were too many of them, spread too evenly, covering too large an area to be anything but the remains of something deliberately built and deliberately buried. What he found beneath the surface permanently changed the story of human civilization. Göbekli Tepe, a complex of massive stone structures built with T-shaped pillars that stand twice the height of a person and weigh between 10 and 20 tons each. The pillars are carved with an assurance that speaks of long practice. Animals in low relief, rendered with confident flowing lines, foxes, lions, scorpions, vultures, wild boar, snakes, spiders, cranes, a whole bestiary of the ancient world captured in limestone by people who knew exactly what they were doing. Abstract symbols and geometric patterns appear alongside the animals, patterns that researchers have spent decades attempting to decode without full success. Some pillars bear the outline of human hands, fingers splayed against the stone, as if reaching through time towards someone who might, one distant day, press their own hand to the same spot and understand. The site was not a house, it was not a village, it was something else entirely. A monument built with extraordinary precision by people who, according to the standard timeline of civilization, should not have been capable of building anything at all. There are no signs of habitation around it, no cooking hearths, no storage pits, no middens of daily refuse. People came here to build and to remember, and then they left. And here is the detail that makes the story extraordinary. The oldest layers of Göbekli Tepe, the deepest, the first to be built, are the most sophisticated. The earliest structures are the largest, the most precisely engineered, the most elaborately carved. The pillars in the oldest enclosures are taller, heavier, and more finely worked than anything that came after. The later structures, built centuries afterward as the younger Dryas period was ending, are smaller, cruder, less accomplished. The carvings are rougher. The engineering is simpler. The ambition is diminished. This is the opposite of what you would expect from a civilization learning as it goes. Skills are supposed to improve over time, not diminish. Knowledge is supposed to accumulate, not drain away. Unless the people building those later structures were not continuing a tradition, but trying to replicate something they'd barely understood, preserving forms they could execute without fully grasping the principles behind them. Each generation knowing a little less than the one before, like a story retold so many times that only its outline survives. One pillar, known as the vulture stone, stands apart from the others. Its surface is covered with a carved scene unlike anything else at the site. A vulture with outstretched wings, a scorpion beneath it, a series of circular symbols arranged in a pattern that seems too deliberate to be decorative. When a team of researchers applied statistical analysis to the carved symbols, matching them against known star positions across thousands of years of precession, the result was precise and startling. The arrangement corresponds to the night sky of approximately 10,950 years before the Common Era, the very onset of the Younger Dryas period, the moment the catastrophe began. The implications are extraordinary. These people were not simply decorating stone, they were recording the sky. They understood the movement of stars well enough to carve a specific date into a pillar and trust that someone, millennia later, could read it. They were writing a message aimed at the future, carved in the one material they trusted to outlast fire and flood and the slow forgetting of generations. A message that says, in the language of stars and stone, this is when it happened. Remember. And then they buried it. This is perhaps the most extraordinary act of intentional memory in human history. The entire complex was deliberately filled in, not destroyed, not abandoned, carefully, painstakingly filled with earth and rubble by the very people who built it. Thousands of tons of soil, carried by hand and packed around the pillars, filling the chambers, sealing the carvings, hiding the site from a world they knew was changing in ways they could not stop. It was not the hasty work of people fleeing a disaster. The fill material is clean and sorted. The work was done carefully, over time, with the patience of people who intended it to last. Picture it, a late afternoon, the light amber and heavy, the kind of light that makes stone glow from within. Small figures are working steadily, carrying baskets of earth to pour around pillars they spent years carving. They know the world they lived in is ending. They cannot save their crops, their settlements, their way of life. But they can save this. They can bury what they know deep enough that it might survive. Not for their children, perhaps not even for their grandchildren, but for someone, somewhere, thousands of years from now, who might dig down through the soil and find these carved stones waiting and understand what they were trying to say. It is the most patient act of hope in human history. A message sent forward through time by people who had no guarantee that anyone would ever receive it. And it worked. Klaus Schmidt found it, 11,000 years later, beneath a hilltop in Turkey that no one before him had thought to look under. The carved pillars were still there, still intact, still holding the sky of 10,950 years before the Common Era on their surfaces. The message arrived. There is something deeply calming about the image of stones being sealed in earth, the deliberate slowness of it, the trust that knowledge, buried deep enough, can outlast any catastrophe. The meditative quality of people doing careful, unhurried work in the fading light, not because they believe they will be saved, but because they believe what they know is worth saving. Your own breathing may have slowed without your noticing. That is the body recognizing something restful. The weight of old stone, the patience of careful hands, the quiet that comes from watching people do important work without hurrying. The people who sealed that monument in earth knew something that their descendants would spend 10,000 years trying to remember. In the next room, you can hear them trying, in every language, on every continent, telling the same story. There is a pattern in human mythology so consistent that scholars have studied it for centuries without quite explaining why it exists. Every major civilization on Earth preserves a memory of catastrophic flooding. Not an ordinary flood, a world-ending deluge that destroyed a previous age, drowned the coastlines, darkened the sky, and forced a handful of survivors to rebuild from almost nothing. These are not stories about rivers overflowing their banks. These are stories about the world itself being unmade by water and then slowly, patiently remade. The oldest written version comes from Sumer, from the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates. In what is now southern Iraq, a man named Utnapishtim, or in some versions, Zayusudra, is warned that the world will be destroyed by water. He builds a vessel, he fills it with seeds and knowledge and the memory of everything that came before. He brings aboard the people he loves and the animals he can carry, and the grain that might, if the water ever recedes, grow again in new soil. The waters rise. The rain falls for days without stopping. And then, slowly, the storm passes and the world goes quiet. And then, silence. The longest silence the world had ever known. The rain stopped and the wind stopped and the sound of waves softened to something barely louder than breathing. Utnapishtim stands on the deck of his vessel at dawn, alone on a calm sea that stretches to the horizon in every direction. There is no land visible. There is no sound except the gentle lapping of water against wood and the soft creak of the hull settling in the swell. The sky is washed clean and pale, the color of light through thin cloud, and the water beneath is so still that it reflects the sky perfectly, so that the vessel seems to float not on the sea, but in the sky itself. He releases a dove, and it circles once and returns. There is nowhere for it to land. He releases a swallow, and it too returns. Finally, he releases a raven, and the raven flies toward the horizon and does not come back. Somewhere beyond the edge of sight, dry ground has emerged from the water. Let the ancient world hold your attention loosely, the way a river holds a leaf. The image is extraordinary in its stillness, a single figure on calm water at the first light of morning, a bird vanishing into a pale sky, the entire world reduced to silence and slow, patient hope. The Sumerian poets who inscribed this story onto clay tablets 4,000 years ago were not recording a weather event. They were preserving a memory so old that even they could not say with certainty where it came from, only that it mattered enough to be written down before it was forgotten entirely. The Greeks told their own version. Deucalion and Pyrrha, alone on a mountaintop after the water recedes, the last two people in a drowned world. They are told to throw stones over their shoulders, and from the stones, new people rise. A beautiful image of civilization beginning again from the bare bones of the earth itself. Two people on bare stone, with nothing left but the earth itself and the willingness to begin again. It is a small, quiet image, no armies, no heroes, no divine intervention beyond the instruction to keep going. Just patience and stones, and the faith that the world could be rebuilt from almost nothing. But the Greek tradition carries a deeper layer. The philosopher Plato described his civilization called Atlantis, not as a fantasy or a children's tale, but as a specific place, advanced and organized, that sank beneath the ocean in a single day and night of catastrophe. He placed its destruction at 9,000 years before his own time, which puts it squarely within the window of the younger Dryas. Plato said he received the account from Egyptian priests at the temple city of Syria, and the priests told him something remarkable. "You Greeks are children," the priest said. "You remember only one flood. We have records of many." The priests themselves claimed to preserve memories older than any Greek tradition, records of civilizations that had risen and fallen and risen again, each time losing a little more of what came before. Plato listened in a warm garden in Athens, the afternoon light golden on the stone walls, hearing a story that had already been ancient for thousands of years before it reached his ears. The weight of those centuries must have settled on him like dust settling on a library shelf. Slowly, silently, and all at once. In the Hindu tradition, a man named Manu encounters a small fish in a river. The fish asks to be saved, and Manu, moved by some instinct he cannot explain, lifts it from the water and carries it in a pot. The fish grows. It outgrows the pot. It outgrows the pond Manu places it in, then the river, then the sea itself, until it is impossibly vast, a being that contains the memory of an entire ocean. The fish warns Manu that a flood will come to dissolve the world, and when the waters rise, it returns. It guides his small wooden vessel through the rising water, through waves and darkness and wind, to the peak of a mountain, where Manu waits in the silence and the starlight for the land to emerge again. The Hebrew account needs only a sentence. Noah and the ark are familiar enough to carry themselves. But what is less familiar is that the Hebrew version is not unique. It belongs to a family of stories that stretches across every inhabited continent. The Aztecs described not one, but multiple ages of the world, each destroyed by a different catastrophe: flood, wind, fire, rain of stones, each rebuilt from the ruins of the lost. Indigenous peoples of Australia carry flood memories that geologists have matched to specific sea level events from the end of the last ice age. Oral traditions preserving accurate geological information across 12,000 years of unbroken retelling, from one generation to the next, around fires on a continent that has never had a written language. In Polynesia, in sub-Saharan Africa, in the oral traditions of South America, and the islands of the Pacific, the same story, told in 100 languages by peoples who had no contact with one another and no reason to invent the same catastrophe independently. There is a quiet between each of these traditions, the pause between one fire and the next, between one continent and another, between one language and the next. Let the pause last. There is no hurry to move between them. Each one is its own room in the library, its own hearth, its own circle of faces listening in firelight to a story that is somehow both theirs and everyone else's. These stories are not about the water, they are about what survived the water, the seed carried on the boat, the knowledge preserved in stone, the writing pressed into wet clay before the clay dried, the memory that refused to drown. They are lullabies, in a way. The oldest lullabies in the world, told around fires on every continent, assuring children that the world has ended before and people survived it, and that survival is possible because someone, somewhere, chose to remember rather than to forget. The stories all end the same way, with someone standing on dry ground, looking back at the water, holding whatever they managed to carry. In the next room, you can see what they built with it. Something remarkable happens in the archaeological record at roughly 10,000 years before the Common Era, in Sumer, in Egypt, in the Indus Valley, in China, within a few centuries of one another, in places separated by thousands of miles of ocean and desert and mountain range. Civilizations appear that are already organized, already building in stone, already measuring the sky with a precision that modern engineers have verified to fractions of a degree. The agricultural revolution does not show the slow, faltering progression you would expect from people learning to farm for the first time. It appears already diversified across dozens of crop species, already with irrigation principles understood and applied, spread across an area too wide and too uniform for a single point of origin. The domestication of wheat, barley, lentils, and peas appears in the Fertile Crescent, already sophisticated, already working with multiple strains and varieties, as if the people planting these crops had inherited generations of accumulated knowledge about which varieties to select, how to rotate them through the seasons, how to irrigate, and when to harvest. You do not learn these things in a generation. You do not even learn them in 5 generations. These are the skills of a long, patient tradition, and they appeared fully formed, as if carried from somewhere else and set down in new soil. The megalithic building tradition appears on every continent within roughly the same window. Massive, mathematically precise stone structures in Peru, Turkey, Egypt, Cambodia, Malta, Indonesia, Mexico, all showing similar engineering principles, similar astronomical alignments, and in many cases, similar construction techniques using stone blocks that weigh tens or hundreds of tons, fitted together with a precision so exact that a knife blade cannot be inserted between them. These structures were not built by trial and error. They were built by people who understood geometry, who understood the properties of stone, who understood how to move weights that modern cranes would struggle with, and who understood exactly which stars their monuments needed to face on which morning of which year. And the astronomy, the kind of mathematical knowledge needed to track celestial cycles accurately enough to build monuments aligned to specific star positions on specific dates, to know that a particular stone doorway will frame a particular star on a particular morning of a particular year, does not emerge from nothing in a single generation. It requires centuries of careful observation, patient recording, and meticulous transmission from one astronomer to the next, night after night after night, watching the sky turn and noting where each point of light appeared and when it returned. And yet this knowledge appears fully functional at the very earliest layers of every ancient civilization we have examined. Not learned over time, not improved upon gradually, but present from the beginning, as if it had been carried there from somewhere else and set down whole, like a book placed on a shelf by someone who had spent a lifetime reading it. There is nothing you need to remember from this. Let the details blur at the edges. Wonder, not argument. That is what this room holds. Open questions that float in the warm air, like dust motes in a shaft of light, asking nothing of you, expecting no answer. The simplest explanation is not that humanity spontaneously became capable at 10,000 years before the Common Era. The simplest explanation is that knowledge survived, that the people who founded these civilizations were not beginning from nothing, but working from fragments of something older, something that ended at the younger Dryas boundary, 12,800 years ago, and that the survivors carried forward in seeds and star charts and stories and stone. Imagine the knowledge keepers, not kings or generals or priests of a state religion, just the people who remembered, figures arriving on high ground in a devastated landscape, carrying what they could save in their arms and in their memories. Seeds pressed into new soil, the first act of preservation after loss. Astronomical measurements carved into wet clay, the second. Stone monuments built on the most stable ground available, encoding what they remembered before the last generation that understood it fully passed away. They were not inventing civilization for nothing. They were attempting to save it from disappearing entirely. The quiet dignity of rebuilding, the patience of people who have lost almost everything and choose to plant anyway, knowing they may not live to see the harvest, but trusting that someone will. There is something deeply restful in that image, the certainty that even catastrophe cannot erase the human instinct to preserve, to teach, to begin again. Your breathing has settled into the rhythm of this place, without your choosing it. Slow, even, unhurried, like the rhythm of seeds being placed one by one into dark earth by hands that have chosen, quietly and without fanfare, to believe in the future. Some of the things they built still stand, some of them sank. The next room is quieter. You will need to hold your breath. The Sphinx sits in the desert outside Cairo, and it has been sitting there for so long that the desert itself has forgotten what it was like before the Sphinx arrived. Most people see it in daylight, squinting against the sand and the crowds. But imagine it at night, alone, with no one else present, and the Milky Way overhead, a river of light pouring across the sky. The same river of light that has been pouring across that same sky since long before the pyramids were built. Before the pharaohs, before Egypt had a name, the stone is silver and grey in the starlight, and the silence around it is the silence of deep desert. Not empty but full, full of wind and distance, and the slow breathing of the earth. Look at the body of the Sphinx, not the head, which has been restored and reshaped over millennia. The body, the limestone flanks show deep vertical channels running from top to bottom in sinuous, rounded grooves. This is not the erosion pattern of wind-blown sand, which cuts horizontally and leaves sharp, angular edges. These are the channels carved by prolonged, heavy rainfall, water running down the stone for centuries, softening and rounding the rock in vertical streams. Geologist Robert Skoke of Boston University has argued that this water erosion places the original carving of the Sphinx thousands of years earlier than the conventional date, back into a period when the climate of North Africa was wet enough to produce the kind of sustained, heavy rainfall that could carve those deep channels into solid limestone. That rain has not fallen in that region for more than 7,000 years. The Sphinx remembers weather that the desert has forgotten. If your mind wanders, let it wander somewhere ancient and warm. There is nothing to come back to. The Sphinx stands in a desert that was once green and wet, a landscape of grasslands and seasonal rivers and rain. And the same rising seas that changed the climate, that turned the grasslands to sand, also swallowed cities along every coastline on Earth. The water rose, and the world changed shape. In the Gulf of Cambay, off the western coast of India, sonar scanning in 2001 identified what appeared to be stone structures sitting 120 feet beneath the surface of the Arabian Sea. Walls, foundations, what may be the outlines of streets, spread across an area too large and too regular to be natural geological formation. Whatever built these structures built them on dry land, land that vanished beneath the waves when the ice sheets melted and the seas rose at the end of the last ice age. Off the southern coast of Japan, near the island of Yonaguni, divers have explored massive stone formations beneath the water, terraced platforms, what appear to be staircases, and broad doorways, right-angled structures that sit below the waterline and have sat there since the sea levels rose at the close of the Younger Dryas period. Fish swim through the doorways now. Shafts of pale sunlight slant down from the surface, illuminating walls that have not been dry for 12,000 years. Anemones grow on the steps. Small silver fish drift in and out of the openings in unhurried schools. The silence below the water is total and complete. The kind of silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something deeper. The quiet of a place that has been resting for a very long time and has no intention of waking up. The current moves slowly over the stone, patient and unhurried, the way water always is when it has nowhere to be and all the time in the world to get there. These are rooms in the library that the sea has been reading for 10,000 years. Whatever they once were, temples, gathering places, platforms where people stood and watched the sun rise over water that has since risen to swallow them whole. They belong to the water now. Only the fish pass through the doorways. Only the current turns the pages. And the stone remembers its shape, even under the weight of all that water, the way old stone always does. The water is still. The stones are patient. In the next room, the air is warmer. It smells of a village that once stood in what is now Syria. Abu Hureyra was a village, small, unremarkable, set on a hillside in what is now northern Syria, in a landscape of dry grass and olive trees and wide open sky. People lived there for thousands of years in the unhurried way that people live in places where the land provides and the seasons are reliable. They built simple structures of mud, brick, and plaster. Walls thick enough to hold the warmth of a fire through a cold night. They made tools from bone and stone, scrapers, awls, grinding stones worn smooth by years of use. They gathered grain and ground it into flour and stored it in clay vessels that they shaped with their own hands and dried in the afternoon sun. They lived ordinary lives, the kind of lives that do not make it into history books. The kind of lives that are measured not in monuments, but in meals, in seasons, in the quiet accumulation of days spent in the same place with the same people under the same patient sky. And then, 12,800 years ago, something happened to Abu Hureyra that the village could not have expected and could not have survived. In 2022, researchers from the University of South Carolina published a study that confirmed what earlier excavations had suggested. The construction materials at Abu Hureyra, the mud brick, the plaster, the bone tools, the clay vessels that had held the grain, showed evidence of melting, not burning, not charring, melting, at temperatures achievable only through cosmic impact, the kind of heat that occurs when a fragment of a comet releases its energy in a burst so intense that stone flows like water and clay turns to glass in an instant. Faster than a human eye could register the change. Picture the archaeologists, kneeling in Syrian soil under a warm afternoon sun, carefully brushing earth from materials that melted 12,800 years ago and then were buried under meters of sediment, preserved in silence, waiting to be found. The brush moves slowly, bristle by bristle. The soil falls away in fine grains. And there, resting in the careful hand of a researcher in the 21st century, is a piece of mud brick that melted in a single instant at the beginning of a catastrophe that changed the shape of the world. The brick is smooth on one side, where the clay flowed, rough and granular, on the other, where the heat did not quite reach. It is a small object. It fits in a palm, and it carries the memory of a moment that lasted less than a second, but echoed for 12,000 years. The patience of the archaeologists mirrors the patience of the earth itself, careful, unhurried, willing to spend years revealing what a single instant created. There is something restful in the image, the slow work of discovery, the brush moving gently over ancient soil, the sense that the truth, however long it takes to emerge, is patient enough to wait. The melted village is not the only evidence. In 2018, a study published in the Journal of Geology analyzed samples from 23 sites across 4 continents and confirmed that the younger Dryas boundary layer, that thin dark line from the first room in the library, consistently contained the same markers: platinum anomalies, nanodiamonds, microspherules, soot deposits consistent with continental scale fires. The signature of a cosmic event present everywhere at the same depth, at the same moment in time. 23 sites, 4 continents, the same thin dark line carrying the same message in the same silent language. The thin dark line was not an anomaly, it was not a local event, not a regional curiosity, not a quirk of one particular excavation. It was a message, written in the language the Earth uses when it has something urgent to record. The same message, in the same materials, at the same depth, on every continent where anyone has dug deep enough to find it. And now, after decades of patient research by hundreds of scientists working independently across the globe, that message can be read. Something struck the Earth 12,800 years ago. It was immense. It was sudden. And for the people who lived through it, in Abu Hureyra, on the coastlines that vanished beneath rising seas, in the grasslands and forests that burned across entire continents, it was the end of everything they knew. The village remembered what happened to it by melting. The people who survived remembered a different way, by choosing to begin again. Consider a world before the impact. Not a superpower, not a civilization with highways and satellites and global shipping routes, but a connected, knowledgeable world, people scattered across favorable coastlines and river valleys on every continent, developing agriculture, watching the stars, building in stone, navigating the open ocean, sharing techniques and seeds and stories across distances that would take generations to cross. A world that had been growing quietly for thousands of years, perhaps tens of thousands, in the way that all human endeavors grow, through the patient accumulation of knowledge passed from one pair of hands to the next, from one fire to the next, from one generation to the next. Someone learned to navigate by the stars and taught their children. Someone discovered which plants could be cultivated and which seasons favored which crops, and the knowledge was carried forward. Someone found that certain stones could be cut and fitted and stacked into structures that lasted for centuries, and the technique spread from settlement to settlement along the trade routes that connected coastal villages across thousands of miles of ocean, an unbroken chain of teaching and learning that stretched back further than anyone could remember. Then, in a period of days, the comet fragments struck the ice sheet that covered most of North America. The floods came, not river floods, but walls of meltwater racing across entire continents. The fires came, ignited by the atmospheric shockwave, burning simultaneously across millions of square miles. Sea levels rose as the ice melted. The coastlines where most of the population had lived, the fertile, accessible, generous land where anyone with sense would build a settlement, disappeared beneath the ocean. The centers of knowledge and agriculture, sitting in exactly the places you would expect to find them, were drowned or burned or buried under meters of flood sediment. The survivors scattered to high ground with whatever fragments of knowledge they could carry. They were traumatized, isolated, cut off from one another by rising water and burning landscape. They no longer had the institutions, the tools, or the numbers to continue from where they left off. They had only what they remembered and what they managed to save. And what they did on that high ground in the aftermath of the worst event in human memory was plant. They pressed seeds into dark earth, seeds from plants that had been cultivated for centuries, carrying the genetic memory of thousands of harvests. Seeds of wheat and barley and lentils, carried in pouches and in baskets and in the folds of clothing through flood and fire and the long walk to high ground. And when they reached a place that felt safe enough, a place where the soil was dark and the water was clean and the sky was no longer on fire, they knelt and pushed those seeds into the earth one by one, with the same careful hands that had once built monuments and measured the movement of stars. They taught their children how to read the sky, which constellations rose, at which season, which star marked the solstice, which pattern in the heavens meant the rains were coming, and which meant drought. They built monuments on the highest, most stable ground available, encoding what they remembered before they forgot it. Monuments like Göbekli Tepe, carved with astronomical knowledge and sealed in earth against the forgetting of generations. They created systems of marks on clay and stone to capture what they knew before the last person who remembered it fully passed away. The people in this story have been asleep for millennia. You have their full permission to join them. And their descendants, a few thousand years later, appeared in the archaeological record as the sudden, unexplained flowering of civilization in Sumer, in Egypt, in the Indus Valley, in China, already possessing mathematical knowledge, already building in stone, already navigating by stars, not because they invented all of this in a handful of generations, but because they inherited it in fragments from a world that ended, and they used those fragments to begin again. This is the deep human impulse. Even at the end of the world, people build, people preserve, people teach. Seeds are planted in new soil. Knowledge is carved into stone. Stories are told around fires year after year after year, so that the next generation might have a better start than rubble and silence. This is what humans do. This is what humans have always done. The earth was patient, and so were they. They planted, they built, they remembered. And above them, the same stars turned. The last room in the library has no walls, only sky. Step outside. The library behind you is warm and still. The rooms you walk through tonight, the geological room with its thin dark line, the monuments sealed in earth by people who trusted the future, the mythological room with its water and its quiet, the submerged cities where fish swim through doorways that have not been dry for 12,000 years, the village that remembered by melting, the high ground where survivors planted the first seeds. All of those rooms are still there. They will be there tomorrow night, and the night after, and the night after that. But this last room has no walls, only sky. The Taurid meteor stream crosses the Earth's orbit twice each year. On certain nights, you can see its bright streaks among the familiar constellations, brief lines of light, there and gone, beautiful and ancient and harmless now, just light, moving through the dark, the way light always has, since long before anyone was here to watch it, and long after the last watcher has closed their eyes. The builders of Göbekli Tepe watched this same stream. They carved what they saw into the vulture stone, the sky of 10,950 years before the Common Era, preserved in limestone for anyone who might eventually learn to read it. The message was sent across 12,000 years of silence, and it was received. Tonight, the same sky hangs above you, the same stars that Utnapishtim watched from the deck of his vessel, on a calm, dawn-lit sea, the same stars that the Egyptian priests pointed to when they told Plato that his civilization was only the latest in a long, long line. The same stars that shone above Göbekli Tepe as the builders sealed their monument in earth and walked away into a world that was ending around them. The same stars above Abu Hureyra, above the high ground where the first seeds were planted, above the submerged cities that the sea has been quietly reading for 100 centuries. There is nothing at the end of this that requires you to be awake. Drift whenever you are ready. You have walked through every room, The library is still here. It will be here tomorrow night and the night after. If you would like to return to places like this again, ancient, unhurried, asking nothing of you, subscribing is how you find the way back. Liking helps this find its way to someone else who is lying awake tonight, looking for exactly this. If any moment tonight stayed with you, a scene, a detail, a feeling, I would love to hear which one. The playlist is a long hallway of quiet rooms, each one a different century, a different civilization. Wander as far as you like. The earth remembers, the stone remembers, the myths remember, in their way, compressed and changed by centuries of retelling, but holding the shape of something real at their center, the way old stone holds its shape even under the weight of the sea, and above it all, the sky. The same sky turning slowly, the way it has always turned, carrying its freight of ancient light from one horizon to the other, unhurried and patient and endlessly calm. Your breathing has found its own rhythm now. Let it keep that rhythm. There is nothing left in this library that needs your attention. The rooms are closed for the night. The questions are resting on their tables. The thin, dark line in the earth is undisturbed. The sealed monument is still sealed, still holding its carved sky. Beneath the soil of southeastern Turkey, the flood stories are still being told. Somewhere, around a fire, you cannot see, but might almost hear if you are quiet enough. And the sky above you is the same sky that the ancients watched. Not threatening, not urgent, just present, just light, turning slowly, the way it has turned every night for 12,000 years and will turn every night for 12,000 more. Let your shoulders settle, let your jaw soften, let your hands rest open wherever they have come to rest. The library, written in earth and stone, will be here whenever you return. The stars are turning. The ancient world is quiet. And so, for now, are you.